Hey, Jacob. So we're starting a new show, eh?
We are very excited. No idea what I'm doing, but it's about time.
We're technically starting two new shows, I suppose.
hmm Yeah.
So what's the plan here? We've got one show which is a kind of a more external one, not necessarily super related to uh, our audience here at the podcast host, starting
hmm
podcasts. And the other one about exactly this, starting a podcast, that whole journey.
Yeah.
So, what do you want to tell us what you're up to? Your harebrained
Yes.
plan.
Yeah. Totally. So I am going to try and start a very little startup, a very little company, and I wanted to document that journey for a few reasons. One, because I thought it would make good content, and we're all about making good content. Two, I thought it would give me a lot of accountability to you. So that's why I asked you to join me on it.
Hmm.
And three, it's kind of an experiment to see and maybe prove to other people if it works that a podcast can be a really good tool for you personally. It doesn't just have to be content.
Yeah.
If this does work really well for accountability and sort of motivation, then I think that's got a cool thing to show people and
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
figure out for myself.
Yeah, for sure. So one show you're leading, I suppose, which is a story of starting this company. Is that right? Is that a kind of good definition of it?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, just like totally raw, unfiltered, me learning one like it's like it's a bit of software that I'm going to try and make.
Yeah.
One, try to teach myself everything around that. Two, try to learn everything around the sort of first steps of starting a company.
Yeah.
So I'm a marketer. I have a bit of experience in development, but I am not a founder with totally different skill set, and I'm not like a hardcore developer, totally
Yeah.
different skill set. So it's going to be something.
Fun.
We'll see how it works out.
So we'll go into, if people are listening, we'll go into the topic. We're going to talk about what that company is, all around that podcast as well. But I suppose the point of this show, this episode, if you're out there listening, this is to document the whole process of setting up a show, the podcast itself, as a marketing tool for that project, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we want to go through, essentially use this as a case study, I suppose, a step-by-step on how to use a podcast to grow a business, how to start a podcast in a way that has the best possible chance of success. And we'll go through all the steps of that through the way using you as an actual real life guinea pig, which is quite nice. So the way I always start with this when we're working with people at the podcast host and the way we lay out our content, the kind of structure around it is the first step is always around a triad of things. The three things, which are the problem itself, the solution for that problem, and then the uniqueness. So why is your solution to that problem unique? And those three things, to me, in my experience with podcasting, is what separates the winners from the losers in podcasting. If a podcaster really thinks those things through quite deeply and seriously and comes up with a good plan that includes something really quite significant around those three together, then they've got such a better chance of making that podcast work and growing an audience. That's what it's all about, how to attract people. And if you think through those three things and design a podcast around them, then you've got a much better chance of attracting those people. So should we jump into them? Go through those three for this show, for your project?
Let's do it. It's interesting. It sounds a lot like the process of starting the company as well.
It's exactly
very similar.
It's exactly that. And it's because if you're selling a product, if you're creating content, whether it's a podcast, a video channel, a blog, whether you're like starting a new like TV series or something like that, it's all this kind of format, I think, in various degrees. So yeah, for sure. So problem, we have to start a little bit with at least a rough audience definition. So who would because then we can kind of define the problem from there. So who's your kind of first idea around who the audience is for this show?
Yeah.
Or do we have to jump back and actually give a bit of detail around what the project is first here?
Maybe we should do that, actually. A little bit of context. So the project itself, so what, the thing that I'm working on?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, not the podcast itself. So what the podcast is going to be about starting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the podcast it'll be 8 parts over 16 weeks. So publish it every 2 weeks. And it's covering a 16-week journey which covers basically starting with an idea for a company, which I'll tell you in a wee sec, and hopefully getting to week 16 and having this sort of final episode, episode 8, where we, or I guess I decide, am I going to keep going? Am I going to pivot, or am I going to kill it? Is that it? Is it, did it not work out? And the thing that I'm trying to build is a tool to help marketers, to help product managers, and potentially actually startup founders as well do market research in a way that is unbiased, and that does a lot of the analysis for them. And I hate to sound like I'm jumping on a bandwagon, but I kind of am. I'm going to try my best to use a lot of the amazing natural language processing, generative AI stuff that there is swimming around just now. It's exciting, and that's a lot of the motivation behind doing it. And it's a lot of the motivation behind doing the podcast as well. It's taking that excitement and kind of putting that into something where I can share it with people, I guess.
Yeah, cool. So this is it's kind of an interesting showcase of the fact that, like, you've got an idea of who would use the app, who would use the project. So people needing some marketing help, we need to get that a bit more specific, I guess, to start with. But then the podcast, if you're going to use the podcast as a marketing tool, it needs to have the same audience. So actually, when we define the audience of the podcast, it's going to be the exact same, pretty much, as the audience for your product, or at least a subset, potentially.
Yeah, I think so. So what I have in my head is there's a group of people that would call themselves indie hackers. And there's a fair bit of, there's like infrastructure around that community, right? There's really good sort of groups on Twitter and hashtags on Twitter and sort of groups of people, but there's also actual sort of social platforms and stuff just for those people. And that's probably the main group, because they're people that are starting companies, they're people that are thinking about marketing, they're thinking about products, and they're thinking about how can I get better product market fit, which is the problem, I guess, that I'm trying to solve. Probably initially for earlier stage companies, not looking to take on the Cantars of the world. But yeah, you're right. They're the same audience, really, which is kind of cool.
Cool.
Handy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's quite right. Okay. So that's rough enough, I think. I think that's a good place to start. We'll dig into that a bit more. We want to make a more detailed ideal listener later. That's when we get to the uniqueness around it, or the success plan that comes from that. But so let's lay out the problems then. What problems do they have with this product? And, well, no, we're not going to go with the product. So what problems do they have that will relate to the podcast itself? Why they might listen to the show? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, weirdly, the show is actually about showing these people how they could use a podcast. It's almost a case study of how to use a podcast, right? So it's relevant to them because it's in their world. It's for early stage people, it's interesting. It's always interesting to kind of do something along with someone, right? So I want to encourage people to follow along and start something, maybe try and do it in 16 weeks like I am. I've not really thought through too much, to be honest with you. But that's the vague notion. It's like getting people to follow along, or encouraging people to do it, and sharing what I've learned, I guess, along the way. But
so there's a few things in there. One of the problems is growth marketing, reaching people, because that's a problem that could be relevant to the podcast. So growth marketing, reach. It's something around authority in there. It's like there's probably the personality side of it as well, like actually showcasing who the people are behind it and that stuff.
Yeah,
all the thing that we know that podcasts are good at.
Yeah, it's giving people owned content as well, because a lot of these people put a lot of sort of effort into building profiles on Twitter and stuff like that. And Twitter could disappear tomorrow, or they could. I mean, just yesterday, I think it was, everyone lost their blue check marks. I mean, say what you will about it, but like, things change quickly with social media platforms. You don't own it, and I think this is again, it's like a case study to say, look, you could make your own content and get good content out of it. You could grow an audience with your own content that you own, with your own distribution channels. And
it's less ephemeral than social as well. It's long term.
That's it. Totally.
Cool. Yeah. There's probably something else I think you just mentioned in there, though, around you were talking about like following along, like learning from your problems. There's actually just some of the problems they have are actually just in running the company. And,
Yeah.
like research and development and recruitment and like tools you use to develop and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's that? It's just operations, I suppose, like how to start a company.
Yeah. I mean, like, so the first episode was kind of introducing you to what it was, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the second episode and then on, it's going to be covering like real sort of absolute basics around like who is it that we're going to be targeting as customers? What are our rough personas? And all that kind of stuff. So like it is going to be going through the motions of really the first steps that you need to take. So I'll be heavily researching and already have a lot of what I need to do to kind of at least get to a place where I've launched something. So I guess a lot of the benefit is actually going to be around sharing that as well. You can get a million sort of checklists of things to do when you're starting a company, but I think it's slightly different to see someone actually do it and give feedback in real time. I
suppose the thing I'm wondering is, because the marketing and growth side of things is obviously a subset of starting and running a company, but it's quite a specific one. Starting and running a company is huge. Like, there's so many different topics in there. So will you concentrate down on what you're doing around the growth side of things? Or do you really want to cover all of the other parts as well?
I think I want to cover everything. Like, I mean, to get paying customers, like, I don't know, like, I need to answer the question, do I need to register the company? To kind of run that through as a sole trader, like they're really everything that is going to need to happen to go from an idea to getting it live. And the part of the beauty of it is that I have no idea what that looks like yet.
Yeah. So the tricky part is, this as well as I, that's going quite general.
Yeah, definitely.
You're going a very general audience there, very wide net. There's a lot of shows out there about, starting companies or how to run a startup, all that kind of stuff. Less around the marketing side of things, but then that's a pretty saturated niche too, to be fair.
Yeah.
So this may be fine. It just means we need to get creative with the uniqueness.
I wonder then how many. So there's a lot of history of people starting these kind of podcasts. How many are doing it at the moment around starting a company in the AI space? There's probably a lot of people thinking about doing it, but it's new and there's probably not a huge back catalogue of it. But there's an interesting angle there, because actually I'm using AI, I'm using ChatGPT honestly for a lot of the planning and a lot of teaching me how to like concepts around code and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's part of the unique angle, is how are we using AI to start a company?
Yeah. Well, that's a really defined problem, isn't it? How to start a company in the AI space.
With AI, using AI with zero experience.
So that was just come into the second part of that is how to start with AI. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, that feels like a really solid, unique problem. So we're defining we're kind of jumping ahead to the uniqueness part here, but that feels quite good actually. I mean, thinking about the solution, if we did think about that problem, if it's how to start a company, the solution's huge there, because there's so many things that you need to actually cover. But if it's just concentrating down on how to start in AI with AI, you've got a double actually niche down there, don't you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And how do we solve it for them? That is actually, you're just going to show it. You're just going to demonstrate.
Yeah. I'm thinking about making some sort of companion content to go along with it. I'm thinking about every other week putting out a blog post with some like examples of things like code samples or templates and that kind of stuff, just as I'm creating stuff for myself, making that available to other people. I was toying with the idea of open sourcing some of the stuff that I was working on as well. But the goal is to make a commercial company, so it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to give it away immediately.
I suppose there's models around that, isn't there? But you're right, it's much trickier. Maybe it needs to be much bigger. But no, I love that. Yeah, so we've got the problem. It's how do you start a company in this particular area and with this particular tool, in
Yep.
AI with AI. Solution is you take them through a case study, which is quite a unique approach because not many people actually do a thing. Quite often, people do a show having done it in the past. Things might have changed since then. Quite often, people do it on a theoretical basis. Like, imagine you did this, you did that. You're a teacher rather than a doer, but you're going to actually demonstrate it. You're going to guide them through it step by
Yep.
step, which is really cool. But a nice, unique part of that, jumping again to uniqueness, you're talking about the extra resources. Like, you're going to solve it by also giving actual, legit tutorials and demonstrations and examples outside of the podcast itself, which adds a lot of uniqueness too. So that's cool. What is there anything else into that uniqueness side of thing? Like, we talk about a bunch of ways to make podcasts unique. Like, you've got niching, which is what we've talked about here. You've got an angle, which might be a particular approach on it. Like, so maybe your angle is often related to background. So your background is in a kind of combination of marketing and development, which maybe is a unique thing. Do you think that ties into the format?
That ties in, but I mean, that's not super unique. I think the unique angle in this is the fact that I blindly asked my boss to do it with me, the podcast. I think that actually adds a lot to it. I think that's a weird dynamic and quite unique, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think the thing that I do want to reiterate is, and to you, is look, this might not work, but if it does, I might be quitting my job and I'm doing it with my boss, you know? I think that makes for interesting content. It's high stakes.
Yeah.
You know, there's all sorts of conflicting interests, and I think that makes maybe interesting. I mean, that's the hypothesis that it makes interesting content. And that's why I tried to do it that way.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, you're absolutely right. That is very unique. So, and just to reiterate to people listening, the idea of digging into these is that this all ends up going into your growth, your marketing material for the show. So this defines what the title should be to grab people's attention in the first place. It defines what should go in the description to really drag them in and say, well, this is a no-brainer to listen to me, to listen to this show. It goes into the artwork because that artwork needs to grab their attention as well, make them identify with it, show them why it's unique, why it stands out to them. So all of this stuff, we need to think about whether that, what you've just described, whether you can describe that in a title, in a description, in artwork that really grabs people's attention, and whether that actually makes it, like you say, sounds interesting, but does that really capture attention? Does it really persuade people to spend an hour of their valuable time with you?
Yeah.
So that's cool. Okay. Any other ideas? Because the other areas are, you've got niching, you've got angle, you've got things like format, you've got you've got rate like production value, that kind of stuff. Anything else in mind around uniqueness?
Yeah. I wonder if actually this podcast is part of the uniqueness as well. The fact that it has sister content in audio form following the creation of the sister content. Like, there's all sorts of meta content happening around this. There's this podcast, there's this video series. This is going to get confusing. There's this video series about creating the podcast, and the podcast is about creating the company. But then there's also going to be accompanying materials for the podcast. I think maybe actually the fact that it's almost like an ecosystem of content is quite unique as well. But it might be challenging. That might scupper everything, you know? That might make it too complex. And I'm the world's worst for making things too hard for myself.
Try to put too much into it. Yeah, for sure. But you've got help because I'm doing it with you as well. And we've got great people in the team that can help out as well, because this all really ties into what we do as a company too, which is teach people how to create great content, to grow an audience, to make a podcast at the core of it. Yeah. But it ties into blogging, video, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. But you're right. If you're out there listening and you're thinking, I'll do all of these things by myself, definitely think very carefully about that.
As you'll probably see over the coming weeks.
Exactly. So I think we've got a good wee triad there. We've got the problem being how to start a company in AI with AI. The solution is you're actually going to legit do it and show them how. But equally, you're going to actually give them resources that go along with that. And that ties in with the uniqueness too, because the uniqueness is very much tied in the niche and the angle together, which makes it very specific. So people out there that are doing this will really identify with that. They'll straight away think, this is what I'm doing, so I should listen. The concern that people always come up at this point is it too small? Is that audience too small?
Yeah, that's fair. I think, do you know, I don't actually think I need a huge audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's we at the Podcasters, we very much parrot the idea that 100 dedicated listeners is better than 10,000 that you never hear from.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in this case, I think that's particularly true because it's actually about the experience that I have with you as a co-host. It's about my ability to use it as a tool, as a sort of journal / accountability tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I'm hoping for the people that do listen to it, it's high impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That it's a real call to action. I think I would call this a victory if 5 people out of the other end try to start similar things.
Yeah.
I think that'd be. I could go to bed at night knowing that I've impacted people's lives in a small way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Not even maybe a small way, maybe even a big way.
Well, that's it.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's great. I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it kind of ticks all the boxes actually of when I think about this kind of niching, because it is super specific and it might be quite a small audience that are the direct primary ideal listener. Those people who think, oh, I want to start an AI company with AI. I mean, that is very niched and very small, but it actually has a much wider appeal in that so many other companies are thinking about using AI to enhance their existing product. So they'll see that and think, they might be a secondary listener in that they'll see it and think, well, I'm not building an AI company, but I'm building a company. So much of those are parallels and I want to use AI to do it. So there's a bit of kind of extra niching there, but widens out a bit. And then there's just simply the fact that a lot of people, I listen to podcasts about starting companies in any area because there's so many parallels. And actually you learn a lot from listening to people do it in different sectors, different categories. And folks that are starting companies know that. So, but there's enough uniqueness to it in that you're actually doing it in real life, which there's not a lot of them around. So it's got those kind of levels. You've got the very specific primary, you've got quite a specific secondary using AI, and then you've got actually a big wide audience that you can widen out to that might attract just now, but equally you could widen out to later, maybe a second season, a third season. So that's how I often think, like when people say, is this too niche? Is this too small? I say, well, I mean, yes, but think of this as just a first season. Second season, how can you widen that topic a little bit? You're still attracting, you're still serving those initial people that were attracted by that really specific first season, but you're attracting now an extra little group of people.
Yeah.
And the downside of doing that initially is that the more general you go, the harder it is to attract people, but you can do that over time because you've got that initial traction, that initial bit of momentum that helps you as you widen out as you go. So that's how I tend to think about it. So yeah, I think that's a really good plan, actually.
Cool, I like it. I was just thinking as you were talking there, I should actually slightly change the company to be about helping people start companies, but with AI for our podcasts. And so then there's like 3 levels of meta.
Yeah. So not be about marketing, but be about actually how to start the podcast, how to start the company. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we'll need to talk about this on our next episode of the podcast. Yeah. But I did actually have some developments last night about how to actually niche down the idea, and it kind of fits quite well into this plan as well as a whole brand of concepts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So go and listen to the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Link in the description.
Link in the description. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of breaks the rules in a few ways, in that it's almost niche enough. It's almost unique enough just doing something about AI just now because it's so new. And yes, it's a massive trend that so many people are jumping on the bandwagon. But because it's new, that still means it's kind of an open Wild West type area. So you can get away with less of the niching down, going specific, making sure you're so on point with your kind of targeting your differentiation, because that is the differentiation. You're doing something that's brand new, that's on a trend.
Yeah. But the principles are the same. The principles are the
Yes.
same, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter what you're doing, you still need to define what that niche is. Like I actually have a suspicion that we'll, although it's slightly general, like I think we've gotten to a good place with it there, talking it through, where it's quite well defined, but it's still kind of generalist. But I have a sneaky suspicion that because it is quite a big topic at the moment, that we'll probably benefit from that. Because there's not really any experts yet. A lot of this technology is so new that there's no no one knows who to listen to yet.
That's totally That's exactly what I was trying to get at there. Probably not explaining very well. Is the more established an area is, the more specific and differentiated you have to get, I believe. Like if you try to start a how to market your company podcast tomorrow, like you have to be so specific, so differentiated, so unique there to stand out. It's so difficult. But yeah, you're in a brand new area. There's like so much more room for experimentation. And just covering that area at all can sometimes be a good enough uniqueness.
Yeah.
All right.
That's not to say though that for people watching that you shouldn't try and start something in a well-populated area, because there are ways to do it. Like you could go like hyper local. You know, if you wanted to start a podcast about growing your business as a marketer, for example, you could start by targeting people in your city. You know, people you know, and just actually branching out that way. There's always ways to make it work. But totally, absolutely agree. Yeah, it's just the trouble is that so many people just try and start a more general one and then fail because there's 100 other options. But yeah, it totally is. It's definitely possible to get in and grow a good show in an established niche just by thinking through all the stuff we've just talked through, like having a really solid definition of your problem, solution, uniqueness, and turning that into a plan, which is your ideal listener, is it goes into your title, your description, all of that stuff. The only other thing that we tend to go through at this point is actually the technical approach, but you've kind of talked about that a bit already. By that I mean like the length, the frequency, the format. You're talking about fortnightly though, eh? Yeah, that feels good to me. Because I think just down to kind of what it is that we're doing it about, there probably won't be enough to talk about in a week. You know, it's I'm doing it in evening hours. There's only going to be so much progress, but there's also, other content that I want to make and stuff like that. So I feel like fortnightly is good as long as it's consistent and sort of people expect it, I guess, to come out. No, I mean, I'm not really expecting many listeners for the first episode, certainly. But for those few that do start listening, you want to make sure that, I guess, that you're putting it out and they can expect it to come out at the same time.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, fortnightly is that's totally fine. The weekly ideal is just because it's kind of people's routine. And so if you're talking about people expecting a show, then they'll not often remember which other week it is. So they know it comes out on a Wednesday, but they don't know whether it's this Wednesday or next Wednesday. But and because people tend to kind of plan in weekly routines, like, I do this every Thursday, I do this every Monday. But if you think that weekly is just likely to make it too stressful and it's going to fail, much better to do fortnightly and get it out every single 2 weeks rather than go weekly and then burn out after 3 weeks. So yeah, definitely. And I don't think it makes too much difference in terms of the growth rate either. Like there is a wee bit of an advantage in weekly just through that kind of more frequent routine, but I don't think it makes a huge difference.
What do you think about, one thing I was thinking about was maybe doing like a 10-minute sort of solo recording and then technically putting something out every week. Yeah. What do you think about having like alternating format like that, where it would be me and you every second week?
Yeah. I really like that actually. And I've seen people do that on a weekly basis to actually increase their output a little bit without too much extra work. Like have their main episode on a Monday and then have like a bite episode on a Friday or something like that. But even better to do it like you're talking about, have our main episode every other week and then having a little update every other week as well. I like that a lot actually. Yeah, I think that could work well. I think that's, again, we talk about this a lot. The beauty of podcasting is that you don't have to stick to a standard. Like people say, but I can't change my format every other week. You're like, well, why the hell not? You're not a radio show.
Yeah, exactly. It's yours.
Yeah, totally. So do it. Yeah, for sure. And I actually, as a listener, it's quite a cool thing to, have some variation, to have a bit of, some people might like the bigger ones better than the small ones, and they maybe will skip the small ones. but it won't put them off from listening to the bigger ones. It just means they'll skip them. The other great thing about podcasting, you can pick and choose as a listener. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And from just a sheer sort of marketing perspective, it's never a bad thing to be at the top of people's to listen to feeds every week,
yes,
even if they only listen to every second.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you're talking about, I think the one we recorded the other day was just maybe half an hour or so, wasn't it? So we're talking about a relatively standard length of maybe 20, 30 minutes each time for the standard one.
Yeah.
And maybe a short one, you're talking about a solo one, like 5 or 10 or something.
Yeah. If I'm going to do it, I want to commit to it though, because there are some podcasts that I listen to which it's weekly, but it's random when you get both hosts, and it annoys me. I don't like it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So like, I think if it's going to be consistent, this is just for me. This is not advice for anyone else. This is, if I was going to do it, I'd want to have it consistent. Like I'm going to commit to doing a wee one every other week.
No, I do agree with that. I totally, yeah. Like I say, so that's the rule of thumb that I go with is you want to have an average. So that's the expectations, but don't be afraid to break out of that average. So on length, maybe your average length is 30 minutes. So your listeners know that mostly you're 30 minutes, but every now and again you do a 2-hour episode, and some people just won't listen because they don't like it, but at least they know that on average you'll be back to the 30 minutes next week. Yeah. But if the length is all over the place every single week, you're right. That will absolutely put off listeners. And it's the same with format. Like you can break out of your average format every now and again. But if you have a different format every single episode, you're absolutely right. Again, it will annoy people, just like you're saying. So I do agree with that. So yeah, consistency around it. There's a few shows I listen to like that. Actually, they changed their format. They used to be like co-hosted, and then suddenly they do 3 interviews in a row, and I just lose interest altogether. Because it's not what I signed up for. But if it was just one interview and then they were back to co-host it the next week, I'd be like, oh, fine. And then I'd keep listening. But yeah.
It's, I think one thing I've been thinking about is, and I don't see it often talked about around this kind of initial planning phase, is almost planning how you expect people to listen to your podcast. I don't know if that's overthinking it, but like thinking about where are they going to be when they listen to it? Like, is this a listen in the background kind of thing? Is it like, to me, this is a commute podcast. You've got quiet time to focus on what's been said, which means you have to keep it short. But like big 2-hour long podcasts, like, you know, that's not feasible to kind of sit down and listen to that intently, you know? But it's just something I've been keeping in the back of my mind, you know? Just to create it with that in mind and figure out, is there anything that we can do along the way to sort of optimize for how I think people are listening to it? I guess it'd be good to get to a point where we can ask people, right? And actually figure out, you know, how are you using this? When are you listening to it? All that kind of stuff. But
yeah, it's a really good point. Learning podcasts that people listen to for a really kind of defined purpose, as in I want to solve this problem, more than the general problem, which is like, I just want to be entertained. Because that's what it is. Like when you're doing a comedy podcast, it's literally, my problem is I'm bored and I want to solve that. And you have to have a unique way of solving their boredom, essentially. But yeah, this one, you want them to listen intently, and therefore if they miss 2 minutes, it might actually be a big deal for them. So you're right, it needs to be shorter. And again, I wonder how does that tie in with the 2-hour in-depth, like Tim Ferriss style podcast? There's always ones that break out the rules, though.
It makes me wonder, like, should it be, you know, if the purpose is learning, I mean, is that really the purpose? I guess it kind of is, sort of teaching in a way, blindly teaching. It makes me wonder if, like, it should have a more strict structure. You know, there's clearer sort of starts and ends to the sections of each episode. Like, what's your take on that?
That comes into format. So some of the stuff that I've got an article that I wrote on Uniqueness ages ago, and I've got a big bit in the format section around breaking a show up into sections. And I have this structure that I teach sometimes around, it comes from my kind of background as a teacher, where if you're doing a genuine learning, teaching podcast, thinking about it in terms of an introduction, which actually lays out the whole thing. A lot of people think an introduction is just a teaser, but actually if you're teaching, you give away it all. You don't keep any secrets. You just create a summary, which actually gives away the entire lesson. Because they call it scaffolding in education. It creates this kind of rough scaffold that people can then put all the little bits, the detail on later on. So the intro should give away the whole thing in like 2 or 3 minutes. Obviously not the full detail, because you can't give that away in 2 minutes, but the full structure of what you're going to talk about. And then you go into the theory, and that could be the second section, which is like 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever that takes. And that goes into the actual detail. And then case study is a third section. So you've done the theory, and now you say, well, this is how I did it in practice, or this is how this person did it in practice. And then the final one, the fourth section, is tasks. Give them homework, like give them something to do with it, because that's really important. As a teacher, you need to make people put it into action. Otherwise, it doesn't stick. It doesn't actually get in contact. People don't assimilate information until they've actually put it into their own real world.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Structure, kind of classic teaching structure. You don't have to stick to that, but yeah, that's definitely one way to think about it.
I really like the sound of that. Yeah, that could be quite easy to do as well. Like I'm imagining in my head, like let's say maybe there's 3 or 4 sort of sections to it. We do that little bit of intro at the start, and then we just make sure to have a sort of point where we say, right, now let's talk about this thing, so there's a clear sort of shift from topic to topic.
Yeah.
And then I could quite easily in Alitu go and make a little split, put in a little short 3-second jingle, just to sort of reinforce this is the next section, you know. That could be cool and quite low effort as well in terms of editing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's easy to do. Minutes, seconds even. And it does make a difference, like having that little bit of polish does make a difference to perception around your show. Like if you have even a couple of those little things in, it can make quite a difference. And it's also, there's something really cool about, I've used this format before and actually broken those, so recorded an episode 30 minutes long like that with video, and then broken it up into 4 videos. And those 4 videos actually can stand alone. Like the theory part can stand alone. The introduction can just be like a primer to a topic. You don't need the rest of it. The tasks, like here's some homework. If you want to achieve this goal, here's some homework. If you really want the theory, go and look at it over there. But if you don't actually care how it works, just do these 3 things. So yeah, they can all stand alone. So it's really a good method for repurposing.
Cool. All right. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan, actually.
All right. Cool.
I'm not taking any notes. I need to remember to watch this video.
Well, I mean, you'll that's the kind of thing I think is a big kind of iterative process as well. Like so much of this, like I believe it makes a huge difference to how successful your podcast can be, thinking about this at the very start. But equally, at episode 10, episode 15, episode 20, you'll probably change a fair bit of this.
Yeah.
To iterate, to based on listener feedback, based on what you found that you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, all of that stuff. So it'll change as you go. But the only way you can change that plan as you go is if you have a plan in the first place. So yeah, I think it's really worthwhile. What's your first milestone then? What's your first sort of steps
for the pod?
Mm-hmm.
I am unhappy with the name. I mentioned this to you already. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure where to go with it, but I think actually what we did today is going to help a lot with figuring out a name, because the name that I'd chosen was kind of generic. It was general. It's not going to speak to anyone in particular. It was something like 16 weeks to launch, which could mean anything to anyone. That could be about anything. So I think what I'll do is I'll go back to the drawing board on the name and get the first episode live. So I'll take the name, I'll do record a separate intro, and I'll see if it's possible to do this sort of section thing that we've talked about in the first episode. But if not, it's no big deal. And try and get that live, I think, on Monday. I think that was the plan. I'd love to get that live on Monday. And then I guess figure out how do I get it into people's earbuds.
Earballs.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, the publishing part is easy enough. We'll just publish it on Alitu. Do your editing in there and everything. So that's cool. But yeah, the getting it out there from that point is that'll be our next. We talk about promotion in a later sort of session when we're helping people plan their show. So that could be a next episode.
Cool.
Initial promo plan.
Sounds good.
All right, perfect. And you've I often encourage people to set a kind of longer term milestone as well. I'm a big fan of seasons, like treating them as seasons and thinking, right, commit to what, a 2-month, a 3-month season. So that would be 2 months would be 8 weeks if you're doing weekly, 3 months would be 12. So with you, it would be fortnightly. You're talking about 16 episodes. No, 16 weeks you were talking about, weren't you?
Yeah,
so it's 4
that's
months.
right.
4 months, which means 16, 8 episodes. So that's good. That's a great season length, actually. 8 episodes.
Yeah. And I've no idea if there is a second season, what it would be, but I'm keeping that open. I think it's important that the name that I choose as well kind of leaves that open.
Yeah. Well, that is one of the massive benefits of seasons, is that you think, right, I'm going to revisit it. I'll take a break at the end of those 8 episodes. That's season 1 complete. You've hit a milestone. You've hit a sense of achievement. You've created a standalone, a kind of a bit of content that solves one particular problem, like we've talked through. How to get through your first sort of MVP. That's your goal at the end of these 16 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can choose. Am I enjoying this? Then let's do season 2. If not, I've still created something cool that actually stands alone that I can use for other things in future.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, like, I know, I could share it just now, actually. I can bring it up quickly. Like, I know what every episode's going to be about, roughly.
Yeah.
For every, so there's no kind of sitting at a drawing board trying to figure out what's this episode going to be. Like, I've got that planned out. I know roughly what they're going to be, and they might change, but if they change, it'll be for a reason. There's no need to sort of stress over it. So I quite like that, and that was, I think that was important to make it feel manageable, actually.
Yeah, I love it. That's another benefit of seasons. You can plan it all ahead. You can have a kind of structure, at least people episode to episode. So no casting about for a topic every single week. Nice. Okay. That sounds cool. I'm looking forward to listening to it.
Yeah, me too. That'd be good.
Cool. It's so difficult just now, slightly off topic, but it is so difficult just now because if you're running things, like anyone running a company is the kind of person that has ideas for other things on a regular basis anyway. And right now there's so many things you can do with this new tech. It's just absolutely nuts. Like, I've got all these things. Oh, I wish I could have the time to go and spend a week and build this thing. AI. Yeah, but it's cool. I'll take the vicarious approach and just follow along with you instead.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Okay. Cheers, Jacob. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Colin. Bye.